I never thought a simple swipe could change everything. But there I was, 21, lonely and curious about finding love in the digital age. Everyone seemed to be meeting online, so I thought, why not? I downloaded a dating app, not expecting much, just a few conversations to pass the time. His profile caught my eye. Jake, 24, loves hiking and photography. His photos were charming, adventurous shots of him in nature and candid smiles that seemed genuine. His bio read, looking for someone to share adventures with. It sounded nice, so I swiped right. When we matched, I was thrilled. Our conversation flowed easily. He was funny, attentive, and seemed genuinely interested in me. After a few days of chatting, he suggested we meet up for a hike. It was spontaneous, but I agreed, thinking it could be fun. He chose a trail not too far from where I lived, promising it was beautiful and secluded. I was excited, but as the day approached, a strange feeling settled in my stomach. I brushed it off as nerves. The morning of our hike, the sky was overcast, casting an eerie light over everything. I arrived at the trailhead and Jake was already there, leaning against his car. He looked just like his pictures, but there was something in his eyes, something I couldn't quite place. He greeted me warmly, and we set off on the trail. As we walked, I noticed how quiet it was. No birds, no rustling leaves, like just the sound of our footsteps. The further we went, the more isolated it felt. My unease grew, but I tried to ignore it. We reached a clearing, and Jake suggested we take a break. As we sat, he pulled out his phone, showing me pictures he had taken on previous hikes. But as he scrolled, I caught a glimpse of a photo that made my blood run cold. It was me, taken from a distance without my knowledge. I tried to keep my composure, but panic bubbled inside me. I asked him about the photo, my voice trembling. He just smiled, a chilling grin that didn't reach his eyes, and said, "I like to capture moments." My instincts screamed at me to leave. I stood up, making an excuse about needing to head back. But as I turned, he grabbed my arm, his grip tight and unyielding. "Don't go yet," he said, his voice low and menacing. Fear surged through me, and I yanked my arm free, bolting down the trail. I ran faster than I ever had, the trees blurring past me. I could hear him behind me, his footsteps growing louder. My heart pounded in my chest as I pushed myself to keep going. I finally reached the trailhead, my car in sight. I jumped in, locking the doors, and sped away. My hands shook as I drove, tears streaming down my face. When I got home, I deleted the app, blocked his number, and reported him to the authorities. But the damage was done. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, the memory of his eyes following me everywhere. Even now, I still glance over my shoulder, haunted by the thought that he might still be out there, waiting for another chance to capture a moment.
I never thought anything strange would come from a dating app. I'm Lucy, 23, a redhead with a love for photography and obscure indie music. I've had my fair share of awkward first dates and cringy messages, but nothing too serious. Mostly, it was just for fun. Until he messaged me. His name was Adam, and his profile stood out from the rest. He wasn't flashy or over the top. His picture was simple, a shot of him standing in a park, looking like someone you'd see lost in thought. His bio was just one line, looking for someone who understands silence. I wasn't sure what that meant, but it intrigued me. I swiped right. We hit it off instantly. Adam didn't bombard me with cheesy lines or vague small talk. He asked real questions, the kind that made me think. We talked about our favorite books, our childhood memories, and the weird things we did as kids. By the end of the first night, we had talked for hours. It felt different, natural. The next few days, we talked more, and it felt easy, comforting. There was something about his messages that felt too familiar, like he knew exactly how to make me feel seen. He asked about my photography, how I loved capturing moments when they were raw, unplanned. It felt like he understood, in a way. After a week of late-night conversations, Adam asked if I wanted to meet in person. He suggested a cafe in the city, a quiet little spot I'd never been to before. "Somewhere peaceful," he said. It sounded nice. I was excited. maybe even a little too excited. I agreed. The day of the date, I spent extra time getting ready, double-checking my outfit. I didn't want to seem too eager, but I was nervous. I arrived a little early, unsure of what to expect. The cafe was tucked away on a side street, hidden from the hustle of the main road. Inside, it was cozy. Soft lighting, the faint scent of fresh coffee in the air. I picked a table near the window, glancing outside to see if he'd arrived. A few minutes passed, and then I heard the door open. I looked up. He was standing there. Adam. But something was wrong. He looked exactly like the guy in his profile, but different. His eyes weren't soft, like in the photo. They were intense, almost too intense, like he was staring straight through me. His smile was tight, not genuine, like he was forcing it. But I couldn't place why it unsettled me. "Lucy," he asked, his voice smooth, almost too smooth. "Adam?" I replied, my voice trembling slightly. I stood up, but my heart was pounding in my chest. He nodded and walked over to the table, sitting down across from me. I tried to relax, to ease the tension I felt building inside me. "It's nice to finally meet you in person," I said, though my voice felt strained. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he just studied me, his gaze lingering on my face. It was so intense that I almost felt like I couldn't breathe. "You know," Adam said finally, breaking the silence, "you look exactly like I imagined. I knew I'd find you here." My stomach twisted. "What do you mean? We agreed to meet here." No, he corrected, his voice dropping slightly, as if speaking to me like I didn't understand. "I mean, I knew I'd find you here, in this cafe, in this moment." I forced a laugh, trying to brush off the strange feeling crawling up my spine. "I guess I'm just predictable then." "No," he whispered, leaning in a little too close. "You're not." "But I am." I could feel my breath quicken, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. There was something wrong with him, something in his eyes, in the way he was speaking, but I couldn't pinpoint it. Just then, I heard a familiar sound, the faint hum of a camera shutter. I froze. A small flash of light caught my attention, and that's when I saw it. There was a camera sitting on the table beside him, a professional camera, the kind you would use for portraits, not one you'd casually carry around. The lens was pointed directly at me. "Adam, what are you doing?" I asked, my voice tight with panic. I looked around the cafe, but no one else seemed to notice. The barista was humming while making drinks, the other patrons oblivious to the oddness unfolding at my table. He didn't answer. Instead, he pulled out his phone and showed me the screen. It was a photo of me. Not a candid shot from earlier today, but a picture of me sitting in my bedroom, smiling at my phone. It was one of the selfies I had taken days ago, before we'd ever even met. "How the hell do you have that?" I demanded, my heart racing now. That's impossible." He smiled again, that same tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You're not the only one who takes pictures, Lucy. I've been following your work for a while. I know your style, your habits, the way you move. I can see it all in the shots." My chest tightened. This wasn't a coincidence. There was no way he could have gotten that photo unless he'd been watching me, maybe even before we ever matched on the app. "Adam, this is wrong," I said, standing up, my hands trembling. "I'm leaving." But he didn't move. He didn't seem surprised. Instead, he calmly set his phone down on the table and looked at me, his gaze sharp. "You can't leave, not yet. We're just getting started." I backed away, my mind racing. "I'm calling the police." "You don't have to. They already know about you. I've already talked to them." That was it. My body reacted before I could think. I ran. I shoved the door open and bolted out of the cafe, my feet pounding against the pavement. I didn't stop. Not until I reached my car, jumped inside, and locked the doors. I could still feel his eyes on me, even from the safety of my car. like he was still watching me. The thought was suffocating. I deleted the app the moment I got home. I didn't want to see his name, his face, his messages anymore. But the notifications didn't stop. Each one was more unsettling than the last. And just last night, a new message came through, one I couldn't ignore. "I'm still here, Lucy. I've been waiting for you to come back. You'll never be alone again." I haven't slept since.
One night, I found myself awake much later than usual, just channel surfing, when an odd impulse struck me to check out a dating app. I approached it with caution, as it was still a relatively new experience for me, and I had some lingering doubts about the possible risks involved. I only logged in once a week, just enough to convince myself I was taking steps toward breaking free from my lonely life, without actually engaging in any serious dating. Eventually, I started chatting with a guy who caught my eye, but looking back, I realized my interest was purely physical. His profile picture made him look like someone I had a crush on for ages, someone with the same charm as actor Ryan Reynolds. Had he not resembled him, I wouldn't have been drawn into the conversation, nor would I have agreed to meet him. When we finally met, I instantly realized that things were going downhill. For starters, he didn't resemble Ryan Reynolds in the least. Instead, he looked more like a jobless bum, scruffy, goofy, with long hair and an awkward demeanor. I'd definitely been catfished, but he didn't seem remotely interested in acknowledging that. His first move was to get me drunk. We met at a local restaurant, starting with cocktails. He kept pushing for more shots between rounds, then another round, then another. There was no appetizer to settle my stomach, so the alcohol was hitting me hard. By the time we got to the main courses, I was already tipsy. He insisted on a couple more margaritas right after the meal. By then, I'd lost count of how many drinks we'd had, definitely more than I was accustomed to. It didn't take long before I realized I needed to leave. I insisted on going home, and he complied, though almost too eagerly. Looking back, I can't believe I was so naive. Never give someone like that your address. It will come back to haunt you. He parked right outside my apartment and kept the doors locked, probably thinking we'd end up having sex in the car before I stumbled back inside. At that point, I was so drunk, all I could do was laugh at the absurdity of it all. We were just about to get frisky in a car on the street like teenagers. That's when it hit me. This whole ordeal was nothing but an attempt to get laid. It felt strange that someone would go to such lengths just to score. It was exhausting and bizarre. I had to draw a firm line and tell him that I wasn't going to sleep with him in the back seat. "So it's a no, after all that?" he asked. "I'm sorry," I said. "If you're really sorry, let's just do it," he replied, trying to pressure me. I kept refusing, but he grew increasingly angry. Eventually he snapped, "Fine, be a prude." "Excuse me," I shot back. He didn't stop there. He tore into me, criticizing every physical flaw, blowing them all out of proportion. He made me feel like the ugliest woman he'd ever seen. But it wasn't just about my looks. He used everything I'd shared with him, whether from my profile or our dinner conversation, to attack me. He turned every personal detail into an insult. To say I was hurt would be an understatement. I was in tears, and it seemed like he took pleasure in it. But that wasn't the end. The next morning I woke up to find flowers and an apology note sitting outside my back door, signed by him. I was speechless. What kind of person goes from insulting someone to trying to act like they had a meaningful relationship? The idea that he might have been lurking around outside my house, peering through windows while I slept, was chilling. This bizarre behavior continued for 2 months. At least once a week, I'd wake up to find more apology gifts left on my porch. I confided in a few close friends and family members, and they all had the same advice. Call the police. Don't wait. Just file a report and take care of your safety. But the shame I felt from being catfished kept me from doing that. I couldn't bring myself to explain how I ended up in this mess, drunk, in his car, in a situation I had no control over. So, I decided to get creative. I pulled out an old Polaroid camera from the back of my closet and set up my 9mm pistol on the pillow next to it. I snapped a photo and wrote a message on the bottom. "I'll use this next time you come by." I sealed the photo in an envelope and placed it on the back porch. After a few days, it was gone, and he never returned. Years later, I unexpectedly ran into him at a local restaurant. He was alone, dirty, drunk, and looked worse for wear. I was with my new husband, who had heard the whole story. My husband shot him a look, and the guy quickly paid his bill and left the bar. In that moment, I felt a sense of closure. But even now, I sometimes feel like I'm being watched. Every time I hear a car pull up outside or catch a glimpse of someone staring at me from a distance, the familiar sense of paranoia creeps back in. It's as if that chapter of my life never fully closed, and the scars, while less visible, still linger. I've learned to trust my instincts more and keep my guard up, but the unease remains. No matter how far I've come, I can never shake the feeling that he's out there, lurking, waiting for the next opportunity to remind me of the madness that once nearly consumed me. This all started when dating apps were just beginning to make waves in the social scene. They were mainly known for casual dating and hookups. I was drawn into trying them out, probably due to a mix of curiosity and social pressure. Plus, seeing friends having success with these platforms made it seem like a harmless way for single people to meet others. Like most people at the time, I'd heard all the horror stories and urban legends about online dating, so I was definitely aware of the risks. This made me cautious, and I took extra precautions when interacting with strangers on these apps. I've always had a slight fear of men, so these platforms felt like a safety net, creating some distance between me and potentially dangerous situations. One day, I matched with a guy named Mike. He seemed harmless enough. His photos were cute, and his profile quote, "just a nice guy looking for his other half," caught my attention. We immediately started chatting, and our conversation quickly became friendly and heartwarming. We were hanging on to each other's every word. For someone like me, it felt like a genuinely passionate exchange, exciting, but not sexual in nature. It was just two people intrigued and eager to learn more about each other. He eventually asked for my phone number, and I agreed. Back then, texting was still a relatively new thing, and it didn't seem strange to exchange numbers for communication. We swapped a few texts, but things started to take a weird turn when he asked for my Facebook and Tumblr accounts. I hadn't mentioned either of those sites, and it felt strange that he was asking to see them. Looking back, I realize how naive I was to trust him. Sharing my social media accounts back then was one of the precautions I took. Having my personal accounts meant he could learn too much about me. I didn't mind him having my phone number, but sharing my social media felt too personal. I wasn't comfortable with that, so I told him I wasn't ready to share that info. He laughed it off and made an odd comment, saying, "That's okay, I'm a spy. I already know everything I need to know about you." I tried to laugh it off, thinking he was joking, but his tone suggested he wasn't. My stomach started to knot up. The conversation was getting too weird and too familiar. I wished I hadn't given him my number at all. Come to think of it, I really had no idea who could have been on the other side of the texts. As we continued texting, the situation only got worse and more uncomfortable. He started mentioning details about my life, my last name, the street I lived on, even the school I went to when I was younger. I couldn't shake the chills running down my spine, trying to figure out how he knew so much about me. It seemed too random to be a coincidence. Of course, I wanted to believe his spy comment was real, but logically, I knew that couldn't be the case. He had somehow found this out through other means, and I had no idea how. The more we texted, the more things spiraled. The texts got creepier and more obsessive as time went by. One message that really stuck with me was, "You're a good girl." I recoiled reading that. It felt gross and wrong. I put my phone down and decided to watch TV to distract myself. But when I checked my phone again, there were even more unsettling messages. He was confessing his love for me and declaring that I would soon be his wife. He even asked for provocative photos, and that's when I drew the line. I started calling him a creep. His response? Laughter, all in capital letters. I couldn't help but feel sick. I put the phone down again and went to bed, hoping to clear my mind. But when I woke up, I was met with hundreds of texts from him. More laughter, more name-calling, again in capital letters. It was terrifying and upsetting. I was just being bombarded with insults and ridicule. After blocking his number, he quickly switched to a new one, blowing up my phone once again. I blocked that one too, but the messages kept coming. How many phone numbers did this guy have? It felt endless. He continued to harass me for hours, then days. Finally, after a week of this relentless torment, I had enough. I contacted my phone service provider and changed my number, hoping that would stop it. Thankfully, it worked. I never heard from him again, and it proved that he wasn't some secret agent or spy as he'd claimed, just a creepy, tech-savvy weirdo. The whole experience was isolating, disturbing, and demoralizing. Months later, and I still can't get over the fear of him finding me someday. I learned a hard lesson that day. Never, ever hand out your phone number to strangers on dating apps. I've always been cautious about dating apps. They just seemed sketchy. But after a few months of feeling like I was missing out, everyone around me seemed to be meeting new people, going on cute dates, falling in love. I decided to give it a shot. I was 19, just starting my second year of college, and I thought a casual fling wouldn't hurt. I wasn't looking for anything serious, but maybe a date or two would be fun. So one night, I downloaded the app, filled out my profile with a few pictures and a short bio, and swiped. A couple of days later, I matched with Jake. He had a great smile, dark brown eyes, and his profile said he loved photography, the beach, and hiking. We hit it off right away, chatting easily about movies, music, and how much we both loved spending time outdoors. His messages weren't pushy or weird. He seemed normal, nice. After a few days of talking, he suggested we meet up. "What do you think of a beach date tomorrow? Sunset?" he asked. I hesitated for a second. Meeting someone in person after talking online always made me nervous, but something about Jake felt different. I agreed. The next evening, I drove to the beach. I was excited, but also a little nervous. The sun was starting to set, casting everything in this warm, golden light, and the beach wasn't too crowded, which I liked. I parked near the entrance and looked around. I spotted Jake standing near the rocks, looking out at the ocean. He was tall, about my height, with a soft smile and casual clothes, just like his pictures. "Hey," I called out as I walked over. "Hey," he said with that same easy smile. "Glad you could make it." We walked along the shore, the sound of the waves crashing against the rocks filling the air. It felt peaceful, calming. We talked about random stuff, about how we both liked photography, how he loved taking sunset shots at the beach, how I was trying to get better at my own photos. For a while, everything felt normal, like I could be myself. But as the sun dipped lower, I noticed something that started to bug me. Jake's gaze lingered a little too long on me, his eyes following me when I wasn't looking. At first, I thought maybe it was just me overthinking things, but it started to make me feel uncomfortable. "I'm glad you picked this spot," I said, trying to push the weird feeling aside. "It's really pretty." He smiled, but there was something different in his eyes now, something harder. "Yeah," he said, his voice a little quieter. "I like it out here. It's peaceful, away from everything." We kept walking, but the air felt colder, and I suddenly wanted to go back to the car. I couldn't explain why, but I felt like something was off. It was almost like the vibe of the beach had changed. Or maybe I was just being paranoid. Either way, I knew I didn't want to be alone with him anymore. "So, what do you usually do after sunset?" I asked, trying to keep the conversation going, though my mind was racing. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he just looked at me. A long, uncomfortable silence stretched between us. "I don't know," he said, his voice almost too soft. "I guess it depends on the person, who you're with." He smiled, but it didn't feel like a normal smile. It was strange, almost like it was forced. I laughed nervously, but the tension in the air was thick now. My heart was beating faster, and I felt this sudden urge to leave. "Actually, I think I'm going to head out," I said, stepping back a little. His expression shifted. It was subtle, but I could see it. His eyes narrowed, his jaw tightened. "You sure? We could hang out a little longer. It's nice out here." I took another step back, feeling my stomach flip. There was something in his voice, something I couldn't place, that sent a chill down my spine. "I really should go," I said, my voice shaking a little. "I have an early morning tomorrow." For a moment, he didn't move. He just stood there, staring at me like he was considering something. Then, slowly, he nodded. "All right, I get it." I turned and started walking back toward the parking lot, trying to act casual, like I wasn't panicking. I could hear him behind me, his footsteps light on the sand, but when I glanced over my shoulder, he was still standing by the rocks, watching me. I quickened my pace, my heart pounding in my chest. When I reached my car, I fumbled for my keys, my hands shaking. I got inside, locked the doors, and took a deep breath, trying to calm down. But when I looked in my rearview mirror, I froze. Jake was standing by my car, not far off, just standing there, staring at me through the windshield. I didn't know what to do. My pulse hammered in my ears, and all I could think was get out of here. My hands were slick with sweat, but I didn't even hesitate. I threw the car into reverse and sped out of the parking lot, my eyes locked on the rearview mirror. I didn't stop until I was miles away, until I was back in the safety of my apartment. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right, that I had barely escaped some kind of trap. For the next few days, I tried to convince myself I was overreacting, that maybe Jake was just socially awkward. But I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach. Then, 2 weeks later, I got a message. It was from him. "I'm not going to let you go that easily." I felt sick to my stomach, horrified, nauseous. I felt helpless. All I could do was block him immediately, but somehow I knew he was still out there, watching, waiting. I don't know if I'll ever feel safe going on another date again. Weeks passed, and the uneasy feeling still won't go away. I tried to bury it, but every time I walk past my window or check the locks on my door, I feel like someone is watching. Maybe it's nothing, but then again, maybe it's Jake, waiting for the perfect time to make his move.